Okay, so we have some information from the Supreme Court. And this is the first day of the new term. So, and we're getting off to a rip-roaring start with the Supreme Court deciding that the Constitution we're only going to respect the Constitution when it's stuff we actually care about. Because Supreme Court declines Biden's appeal in Texas emergency abortion case. And literally the first paragraph. A court order that says hospitals cannot federally be required to provide pregnancy terminations when they violate a Texas abortion ban will stay for now, the Supreme Court said Monday. Because, it's not like federal law is supposed to supersede state law or anything. No. That's just a silly guideline, not a rule. All right. The decision is another setback for opponents of Texas's abortion ban, which for 2 years has withstood multiple legal challenges, including from women who had serious pregnancy complications and had been turned away by doctors. It left Texas as the only state where the Biden administration is unable to enforce its interpretation of a federal law in an effort to ensure women still have access to emergency abortions when their health or life is at risk. The justices did not detail their reasoning for keeping in place a lower court order, and there were no publicly noted dissents. Texas had asked the justices to leave the order in place, while the Biden administration had asked the justices to throw it out. Oh, I'm sure I can figure out their reasoning, because they want abortion bans. I mean, that's why they got rid of Roe v. Wade. If they didn't want abortions to be banned, they would have kept Roe v. Wade. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton called the decision a major victory. The Biden administration argues that a federal law called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA, requires emergency rooms to provide abortions if a pregnant patient's health or life is at risk, even in states where the procedure is banned. The law only applies to emergency rooms that receive Medicare funding, which most hospitals do. Which is very strange because there was an Idaho case last term that dealt with this. And it seems like, I wouldn't say the justices contradicted themselves, but they took that case, and this one, they're not even hearing. Very strange. The Supreme Court decision comes weeks after a presidential election in which Democratic nominee Kamala Harris has put abortion at the center of her campaign. Did I say after? Before. Attacking Republican challenger Donald Trump for appointing judges to the High Court who overturned nationwide abortion rights in 2022. I will never stop fighting for women's right to emergency medical care and to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade so that women in every state have access to the care they need, Harris said on social media Monday evening. Texas's abortion ban has been a centerpiece of Democratic U.S. Representative Colin Allred's challenge against Republican U.S. Senator Ted Cruz for his seat. At a campaign event over the weekend in Fort Worth, Texas, hundreds of Allred's supporters broke out in raucous applause when he vowed to protect a woman's right to an abortion. When I'm in the Senate, we're going to restore Roe v. Wade, Allred said. At a separate event the same day in a nearby suburb, Cruz outlined a litany of criticisms against Allred, but didn't bring up the abortion law. Of course not, because he knows that it's a bipartisan issue. People want to keep access to abortion legal. It's not it's not a partisan issue. It's not like Ted Cruz can say anything anti-abortion and assume that he isn't going to be strung up by his balls. Complaints of pregnant women in medical distress being turned away from emergency rooms in Texas and elsewhere have spiked as hospitals grapple with whether standard care could violate strict state laws against abortion. Several Texas women have lodged complaints against hospitals for not terminating their failing or dangerous pregnancies because of the state's ban. In some cases, women lost reproductive organs, which should be reason enough to not ban abortion. I mean, doctors aren't idiots. They know how to read. And if they are unsure whether what they are doing could be against the law, it's probably the law. So maybe, I don't know, don't ban abortion so doctors aren't even in this position because, they know better than you what health care a woman needs. And it should remain that way. In asking the Supreme Court to toss out the lower court decision, the administration pointed to a similar case from Idaho earlier this year in which the justices narrowly allowed emergency abortions to resume while a lawsuit continues. At the time the Idaho case began, the state had an exception for the life but not the health of a woman. Texas said its case is different. However, because the law provides some exceptions if a pregnant patient's health is at risk. And yet they still have women who are losing reproductive organs because of this law. I mean, what the hell? I would think that, now, either these dipshits want women to be walking incubators or they don't. You can't say we want you to be a walking incubator, but at the same time ensure that a woman loses the ability to be just that. I mean, it just makes zero sense. Texas pointed to a state Supreme Court ruling that said doctors do not have to wait until a woman's life is in immediate danger to provide an abortion legally. Oh, that's so kind of them. Doctors, though, have said the Texas law is dangerously vague, and a medical board has refused to list all the conditions that qualify for an exception. Now, I'd love to say that it's because you can't enumerate all the possibilities because you never know what could end up happening. But this medical board is filled with dipshit Republicans. And no, I'm not calling all Republicans dipshits, just these dipshit Republicans who seem to think that they have all the answers and that they don't want abortions to be performed. So let's not give the doctors any information because then they can't perform abortions. Mark Heron, an attorney for the Center of Reproductive Rights, said doctors in Texas got no clarity from the Supreme Court on Monday. The health care crisis is ongoing, Heron said. Patients are going to continue to suffer. Now, I'd like to say that that's the point. And for some lawmakers and some justices, that probably is the point. But it could also be that a lot of Republicans are just in denial as to the fact that life-saving abortions are actually a thing. Life-saving, health-saving, people just have this narrow view of what an abortion is. And because they have that narrow view, they can't possibly accept all the good that having legal, safe abortion can bring. So, of course they're not going to um admit that things are more complicated than they think, because in their mind it's not complicated, even though it is complicated. And again, you're not a fucking doctor. Stop playing one. Mary Ziegler, a law professor at the University of California at Davis, who has written extensively about abortion, said there remains much uncertainty for doctors in Texas, who could risk life in prison for performing abortions. I think we're going to continue to see physicians turning away patients, even patients who could qualify under the state's exceptions, because the consequences of guessing wrong are so severe and the laws are not that clear, Ziegler said. The Texas case started after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, leading to abortion restrictions in many Republican-controlled states. The Biden administration issued guidance saying hospitals still need to provide abortions in emergency situations under a health care law that requires most hospitals to treat any patients in medical distress. Texas sued over that guidance, arguing that hospitals cannot be required to perform abortions that would violate its ban. The Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the state, ruling in January that the administration has overstepped its authority. Again, there is the EMTALA law. I mean, either federal law supersedes state law or it doesn't. I mean, that is a thing. EMTALA still exists. Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra, I don't know. Becerra? I don't know. Said in a post on X, reproductive rights are under assault in this country, and women's health and lives remain in danger from the chaos and confusion caused by overturning Roe. So that is the end of that article. And, I mean, again, people seem to have a narrow idea of what an abortion is. And they also have a narrow idea of who needs one. People are so married to the myth that only promiscuous women have abortions, and they do it basically as birth control, that they cannot accept that emergency abortions aren't actually abortions. And so somehow that the abortion ban doesn't actually affect this healthcare. So I just don't know what to tell those people. They obviously live in their own world where women are horrible people because they need health care, and because they have it in their head that it's not married women unless they're having affairs. It's only single women, possibly married women, as I said, who are having affairs, who get abortions. It's not that the married woman who is carrying her husband's baby and or in the case of a lesbian couple carrying a sperm donor's baby so they can be raising their child. And they probably have other children. That, to many people, is not the face of women who have abortions. And no amount of pointing out that that is indeed the case, that shit happens and that women will need these abortions. And because it's emergency health care, they either refuse to accept that it's an abortion, or they refuse to accept that these women actually need that health care. Because they just can't accept that their narrow view of how healthcare works is somehow wrong. They would like to believe they know more about healthcare than actual doctors. And that just floors me. I do not care if you've even given birth. You do not, just because you've given birth does not mean that you understand everything about obstetrics. It just means you gave birth, and your experience of that is your experience. You cannot tell other women what their experience is and what they should do about it. Because again, as I've mentioned many times before, if you are in a position where a doctor tells you you need an abortion to either save your life or to save a organ, or that the fetus will die within hours of being born, that the baby will die within hours, possibly a week. If you want to still give birth and not have an abortion, that's on you. You want to do that, fine. Nobody is forcing you. Just like nobody forces any other healthcare on you. You get to decide what healthcare you are comfortable with. But you don't get to decide for other people what healthcare they should take. That is not on you. That is on each and every person who goes through a situation. They get to decide what is right for them and their families. You do not get to make that decision for them. Now Joe Biden is personally pro-life. He is personally pro-life. I think Jill Biden is too. They're personally pro-life. They're both good Catholics. But they also understand that not everybody is. Not everybody is Catholic. Not everybody is pro-life. So, and actually pro-life is a misnomer, as this freaking clusterfuck is proving. Because if you were truly pro-life, this would not be happening. Women would not be having the problems they're having. They would not risk death. Because, let's face it, the maternity mortality rate has gone through the roof in Texas. That should tell you that this abortion ban is not pro-life. Because if it were, we wouldn't be seeing such a humongous rise in maternity mortality. Because women would be just fine. But they're not, because people just refuse to accept that abortion is healthcare, and that the only life these people care about, in theory, is the fetus. And I say in theory because, again, if there is a problem with the fetus and it's not viable, well then, what exactly are we doing here? If they're not a viable fetus, that once birth happens, that they will die within minutes, hours, whatever, that there is no chance of survival. So you're forcing this baby to suffer for the few minutes or few hours that the baby is alive. Again, how is that pro-life? Oh, great, we have a new life. But it's going to be tortured until death. I mean, I just do not see how people... I understand the idea that once the baby is viable, that it's a major ick to consider abortion. But again, shit happens, and it's not up to you to make that decision. If a woman, or both a woman and her partner, decide that they couldn't handle watching their baby suffer for that short amount of time that they would be alive, then that's on them. They get to make that decision. If you choose something else, fine. Personally, I don't think I would want my baby to be suffering for their short amount of life. But other people might not see it that way. So, that's up to you. You don't get to tell other people, though, how to live their lives. You don't get to tell them whether they have to become parents. You don't get to decide whether they should be able to reproduce again. Because again, women have lost reproductive organs. Just let the woman and the doctors do their job. Let the doctors do their job. Recommend the healthcare that they feel is the best interest for the woman, and let the woman decide. I mean, I just don't understand why this is so hard for people to keep their nose out of other people's business. This doesn't affect you. This has nothing to do with the lowering of the birth rate. I just don't see why people are so vested in telling other women how to live their lives, especially when you don't know their situation. Again, people seem to have this idea as to what kind of woman has an abortion, to the point that they refuse to accept that emergency health care is an abortion, even though it literally is. So I just don't get it. I really don't. Obviously, if, again, you have your opinions, if you wouldn't have an abortion in that situation, fine. You don't get to tell others. You just don't. It's healthcare. You don't get to tell other people what healthcare you would choose. Unless you are involved in the situation and giving people your opinion when asked for. Otherwise, stay the hell out of it. Anyway, I'm just going around in circles at this point. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.